Good morning again. This morning we have Rock Lake here, Rock Lake Christian Assembly. Tim St. Louis is going to deliver the message this morning. The thought occurred to me, it kind of snuck up on me. Rock Lake's coming already? Really? Well, wait a minute. That means spring really is here, despite what you might have seen outdoors. And this is a tremendous opportunity to get involved, as a volunteer, or to get our kids involved, our kids, our grandkids, our neighbors, whoever you can think of. This could be the seed that gets planted that grows into the full blossoming Christian. So it's very important. I'm done talking for now. Till next Sunday. Anyway, I'd like to introduce Tim St. Louis.
Good morning. I'm excited to be here. This is an annual visit for me, and it does kind of demarcate spring, right? Because it tends to be, I'm here this first week in April each year, and so for me, yes, it's also exciting to see you, but also to see the change in the weather. And spring coming. Rock Lake is coming. Summer camp is coming. And we have great events planned for the whole summer. We hope that your kids and your grandkids will come and be a part of that with us. We're offering a couple of new camps this year. We've had so much success with our kindergarten, first grade, and a parent camp that we've decided that we would try a second, third, and fourth grade and a parent for maybe those kids who hadn't had a chance to make it to camp for that younger age but still wanted to come with a parent. So if that is in your student's age group, we'd love to have them for that camp, but there are tons of different camps. We're offering some activities camps this year as well. We're offering dance and disc golf and distance running, so if any of those things are for you, we might have a camp that you'd be interested in. We have tons of different opportunities, not just for students, but we are a volunteer-based camp, as you know, so our camp doesn't happen without you. Without you being there to serve and to love and to mentor those students. And so if that is something you're interested in, I'd love to talk to you about finding an opportunity for you to plug in, for you to come and serve. We have people of all ages who come and serve at camp and love on students. Parents get so caught up in the routine of daily life that oftentimes they forget to love their kids. It seems simple, but they forget to love their kids. And we have an entire week to just love on kids and build relationship with them. And so we regularly have students who say exactly what George said, that the day they leave camp is the day they start their countdown for next year, right, when they'll be able to come back. And so, when I grew up, when I was growing up, I attended Rock Lake. I loved camp. It was one of my favorite times of year. And I didn't realize until just a couple weeks ago, it dawned on me as I was preaching a sermon that my parents sending me to all those activities was probably for their own sanity. I was a very good kid, but I was in a family of 6 kids, and I love to poke. I poke my own kids, don't I? Right? I love to poke and poke and poke, and so imagine 6 kids. I just did it constantly. And so my parents, I had this revelation in the middle of a sermon a couple weeks ago that this is what my parents did. They sent me to every possible church event. Everything. I always wondered, like, where did my parents come up with the money to send me to everything? Because, like, the youth minister did all kinds of stuff, and I was in everything. And my siblings often didn't attend, but I went to everything. So, anyways, when I was in high school, I would spend summer mornings golfing. And I would play golf at the local course. We were fortunate enough, we had a great relationship with the manager of the local course. He would let me and my brother come out, and we would be able to golf whenever we wanted to in the mornings, as long as we were off the course by 8 o'clock. Right? As long as we were off the course by 8 o'clock. So we would play on wet grass. We would play, we would run the course. We were track stars in high school. I said track star. I was not a track star. He was a track star. And I would just try and keep up with him. But ours was as much a game of golf as it was a track event. We would hit the ball and run to our next shot. And we would just play. We'd try and play as many holes as we could in the morning. So we would often get there at 5:45, dodging sprinklers, right? Like playing this course. We loved to golf. And so in the evenings, right, when we got back to the house, we had a big backyard at our house. It kind of backed up to the church, and I could practice my golf shots. My dad was very specific. I could only practice with my pitching wedge, right? Because he didn't want me to get a hold of the ball and send it careening toward the church. Now we had a football field plus behind our house. We had a huge yard. But we were also right next to the drive, right? That paved asphalt drive. And so this is like our every night routine. We'd get that pitching wedge out, we'd practice our shots. One day, I grabbed my 9-iron, and I knew I could hit my 9-iron about 150 yards, but this was not the shot. I mean, I could hit my 9 reliably 70 yards. If I put everything into it, 150, but that's not what I was doing. I was just trying to practice my shorter game, 50 to 70 yards, and so I get my first couple shots, ignoring what Dad told me, because a 9-iron is a bigger club. It hits further than a pitching wedge, for those of you who aren't golfers. It hits further than a pitching wedge, and so I'm practicing that 9-iron, and then I swung and I caught a lump of grass. I caught a divot. And I felt the club head turn in my hand, and I immediately knew that I needed to start running, because that ball started careening towards the drive, and it bounced on that drive, and it was like a rocket took over, and it shot towards the church. And I have never run faster in any track meet, in any cross-country meet, in any race. I have never run faster than I ran that day after that golf ball, trying to catch it before it hit the church. Fortunately, there was a little strip of grass that separated the parking lot and the drop-off lane where that ball came to rest. And I thought, my life has been saved. Thank you, God. But I took a look at where I was where my ball lied, and said I could make that shot. I just got to turn and hit it back towards my house. I'll just move it here so that this light post, the light post isn't even in my way, but in the case that somehow, clubhead, whatever happened, and it hit this light post, I would hate for it to go back towards the church. So let's just move it here a couple yards this way. and line up the shot. Now, should I have done this? No. No, no, never. Why? I would have to hit it back over this driveway that's headed straight towards my house, right? Horrible idea. But I did it nonetheless. I lined up that shot, and it was going to be perfect. I hit that ball so crisply, and I heard immediately the ting of the lamppost, and the ball went careening back towards the church. It was, if it wasn't, the crisp clip of the ball off my club, the ting of the lamppost, and the smash of Dad's office window in succession, boom, boom, boom. I could not have been more scared in that moment. I couldn't have been more scared in that moment. I turned and then slowly began to walk back to the house. My brother laughing at me hysterically as my heart was beating violently inside my chest. Of all the windows, my dad's office window. That was the end of my golf career. That was the end. No matter how much I loved golf, I could not golf without clubs. I disobeyed my dad for a couple of reasons. Even though it was worse than I could have imagined, because not only did it go through his office window, it landed straight in his computer monitor. Hole in one. It was worse than I could have imagined. But I disobeyed my dad for a couple of reasons. One, even though I believed he had an acceptable reason for the rules, I knew better. Right? I knew better. I played golf regularly. I knew how to hit the ball. I knew what I was capable of. Right? I knew better. I didn't need him telling me which clubs I could and couldn't use. I was wiser. And two, the consequences of my disobedience weren't real. I was never, ever going to hit the church with a golf ball. That was ridiculous. Or so I thought. Right? Or so I thought. The consequences weren't real until they were. And they were real. They were real. There's a passage in Hebrews 11, and it talks about faith, right? It talks about faith. It explains to us what faith is. It says, now faith is being sure of what we hope for, and is being certain of what we do not see. And this passage goes on to give these great examples of faithful men and women that we see throughout Scripture. And it strikes me that these people, they all have something in common. Their faith in God, it led them to obedience. Right? We can see this over and over again. We see it as we look at Noah, at Abraham, at Moses. These people, they're shown to be in this hall of fame of faith, right? But it wasn't their faith alone. It was their faith that led them into obedience, right? When Noah built the ark, did he know what he was building? Right? Was it his faith alone that built that ark? It was his obedience, right? He had to build the ark not knowing what an ark was, what it would look like, it hadn't rained, right? So what's this flood you're talking about? It was obedience, not just his faith. Abraham believed God, and in obedience, he led his family into the desert at the ripe old age of 75. In search of a land that God would reveal to him when he came upon it. That is not just faith. That is tremendous obedience. Moses' faith led him in obedience when he confronted one of the most powerful leaders on the planet at the time, even though he didn't speak well, right? And each of these people had a deep faith that led them to obedience, even when it didn't make sense, right? For most of us today, right, I believe we're here because we have faith that God is who He says He is. He's the Creator, the Redeemer of all things. He sent His Son Jesus to die for us so that we could have life anew with Him. Right? Like, we have faith. We believe. But has that faith led us to a life of obedience? Right? If I'm being honest with you, I want to be obedient, but sometimes Scripture can be confusing. Sometimes I think there are maybe too many rules to obey them all. There are times, just like when I was a kid playing golf in my backyard, that I feel like I know better. And other times, when the consequences of my disobedience just don't seem to be all that real, right? Sometimes I want to do what I want, but God calls us to something different. He calls us to a life of obedience. The Last Supper, if you think of the Last Supper, it's this important time in the life of Jesus. And I believe that He felt the pressure, right, that was on Him, and he was taking those last moments before He died, before he was led to His death on the cross. Those moments He had with His disciples, He covered some of the things that He felt were so important for them to hear. And John kind of covers that in chapters 13 and 14, and so I want to talk about some of that today. He covered some of those things that He felt were most important for them to hear. In John chapter 14, verse 12, and later in verse 15, Jesus says to His disciples, He says, if you have faith in me, right? If you have faith in me, then you'll do what I've been doing. If you have faith in me, you will do what I've been doing. And in verse 15 spells out maybe a little bit more clearly. He says, if you love me, you will obey what I command. You will obey what I've commanded you. It's more than just knowing and having faith in Jesus. Faith is where we begin our walk, our journey. Right? But we need to realize that as our hearts are transformed, obedience, our actions, like that has to change as well. They need to also be transformed. If you know Matthew 7, that passage of the wide and narrow path, right? Jesus talks about those two paths, and it's easy to know, to think that we're all on that narrow path, headed down that narrow path. But Jesus gives a stern warning in that message. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father in heaven. It's fair to say that if we want to make it through that narrow gate, then we need to have faith in Jesus. Right? We need to have faith in Jesus. But we also have to, what? What does the rest of that passage say? We have to do the will of the Father. Right? That's that obedience. We have to obey. Obedience is like this message that we try and pound into our kids, right, when they're young, right? We want them to obey. We want them to understand why they're doing what they're doing, why they're being asked to do these things, and we want them to get right at it, right, when we ask them. I think, God is very patient with us, right? We often think that or you hear the world saying that, well, God's a vengeful God, right? It seems like he's always taking it out on us, but think about the amount of grace God extends to us. A whole life to try and work out your faith, right? We serve a gracious God. I think what it is that he wants to convey to his disciples, right, at the end of his life, he's trying to convey to them, be obedient, do these things that I'm telling you. In fact, in chapter 13, he sums it up. He says the same thing, he says it 3 times in John 13, 34 and 35. He says, a new command I give you, right? It's not really a new command. It's not really. He says, love one another. Was that new? I mean, Jesus teaching at the end of his life. Was that new? Or it's what he's been saying his entire life, right? His entire ministry. He's been saying, love one another. In the parable of the Samaritan, right? That whole story, that whole parable was premised on what is the greatest command, right? Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. He says in this passage, he says, love one another. And then he says again, he says, as I've loved you, so you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. This is how people will know we belong to Jesus. If we're obedient in this passage. If we, in our hearts, can learn to love one another. I hope people would describe you that way, as someone who loves one another. I hope it's how people would describe me, as someone who loves other people, right? I'm outgoing. I like being around people. I get energy from being around people. But if I'm honest, I love some people. I should be allowing this teaching to transform me more completely, right? If I'm being honest. Because that's how Jesus lived. And you live this life. It's not easy, right? It's not easy to love others. I think this is the biggest difference between the wide and narrow roads. The wide road is easy. Right, the wide path, doesn't matter how you get from point A to B. Live your life however you want to. Whatever way gets you there. But trying to follow Jesus, trying to live the obedient life, trying to understand his teaching and implement it in our life, that's hard. That takes work, right? It's a commitment. Loving isn't easy. It's more than just being kind to others. It's active. Loving is an investment of our time, of our energy, sometimes our resources. It's prioritizing others above ourselves. It's sharing life together. It's listening to others' needs and actually hearing them, showing concern, helping when we're able. Love has to begin somewhere. Through an act of kindness, an invitation to dinner, even an evening around a campfire, shopping together, right? Almost anything that you do in life can be done with someone else, even running errands. If we aren't serious about loving others and sharing life, are we serious about loving Jesus? Because this is it. This is the life of the community we're called to. Jesus says next to loving God, this is the most important command. And if God calls us to a life of faith and obedience, then this is what it is. Learning to love one another. This teaching seems too easy on the surface, right? We've heard it thousands of times. Love one another, love your neighbor as yourself. Actually, in John 13, if you look at this passage more in depth, right? Jesus actually says, he says, I'm only going to be around a little bit longer, right? In verse 33, he says, my children, I'll only be with you a little longer. And then he gives them these commands, right? Love one another. Simon Peter hears it with the rest of the apostles. He hears it, and what does he say? Does he say, God, how should we love others? God, what should we do? How can we show people, these people that you entrusted us, how to love them? No, Peter, like so many of us, the love part goes right past him. In one ear, out the other. Peter's response is, Lord, where are you going? What's going on? We're going to go with him. When's that going to happen? Right? Like the teaching passes him right by. And I don't want that to be us today. Okay? So I'm going to read this passage to you one more time. A new command I give you. Love one another. As I've loved you, so you also must love one another. And by this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. If you've mastered this, turn to Matthew 5. Right? Turn to Matthew 5, because that's where Jesus takes it up a notch. Right? You think you've mastered any of Jesus' teachings? Boom, back to Matthew 5. He's going to knock you in the face. Right? He says in Matthew 5:43, flip there. He says in Matthew 5:43, right? You've heard it said, love your neighbors and hate your enemies. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Right? He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Aren't even the tax collectors doing that? Right? Aren't the non-Christians doing that? Don't they love the people that love them? Yeah, they do. And if we want to be called disciples, man, this is a tough teaching. This does take it up a notch, right? I mean, if you're like me, you're saying, what enemies do I have? Really? I mean, enemies? I have maybe a rival in life. My brother, right? Could be over everything. But, no, I still hold it against him that he laughs so hard about that. But if we're honest, right, these last 2 years, they've kind of been a relational nightmare. They really have. And we've kind of seen, even before COVID, right, this wake of broken relationship because people didn't see eye to eye with us. The Me Too movement, standing or kneeling for the flag, Black Lives Matter, defunding the police, right? Masking or not to mask, Republican or Democrat, vaccinating or not vaccinating. Right now we see this massive war that's breaking out with Russia and Ukraine, and we certainly want to say that the Russians are the enemy, right?
Right.
That's what we want to say. And to be honest, there are people who are doing bad things. But God calls us to love anyways. He calls us to love anyways. We aren't simply to love those who love us and sweeten our ears with their words, right? We're called to love our enemies. We're called to love those people we don't see eye to eye with. Jesus says, love your enemies. Why? Because he loved them first. He created them just as he created you. He causes the sun to shine on them, just like it shines on you. I remember there was a song that we sang in Sunday school. We are one in the Spirit, right? And the song concluded by saying, and they'll know we are Christians by our love. By our love, yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Is this a song that really exemplifies who we are? Is this a characteristic that people would use to identify you? I hope that that's the case. I hope that that's the case. But I struggle with people, loving people who wronged me. I struggle with it, right? Most of us do. But if our faith is to lead us to obedience, then somehow, we have to find a way to move beyond that and truly love others. Every sermon this preacher preaches is one that they need to hear, right? I need to hear this. Loving others is not easy. It is a work in progress. Faith should lead us to obedience. Obedience to what? Right? That's why we need to be in the Word. Right? We need to understand what it is that we're committing to, what it is that we're following, what it is that we're doing. Jesus tries to make it very simple for us, though. He tries to sum it up as best as he can. Love God. Love others. Even those who we might not see eye to eye with. Because Jesus loved them first. Love in real and practical ways, right? Pray for them. Pray for them. It changes your heart as well as God does work on them, right? God does work on both of us. Consider the needs of others and how you can serve them, how you can love them, how you can be there for them. You as a church, as a community, look at the people around you. How can you serve and love these people that are your neighbors? I love what you're doing with your Garden of Eden and with your Easter extravaganza, right? Those are great ways to love people right here in your community. The teen center, right? Crosswalk, and the work that you guys are doing there. You guys are involved in practical ministry, loving others right here. Keep doing that. But keep looking for ways and people in your own lives who you can love, right? Who you may consider enemies, who you may consider rivals. This is the way to the narrow gate. A faith that leads to obedience. Let's pray. God, we're so thankful that you have given us the example of your Son, that you've given us your word to put in our heart. God, help us to understand that faith is what leads us to salvation, but we need to live a life that's transformed by that faith. One that demonstrates a love for others. God, we understand that loving is not easy, that it's something that takes work, that takes intentionality, that takes bearing our own pride, our own agendas, humbling ourselves, God. Help us to love one another, even when it doesn't make sense. Because this is how we can be a light, different than the rest of this world, God. This is what will guide us to that narrow gate, God. We're thankful for all you've done and all you continue to do in our lives, Lord. Thank you for the work that the church here is doing in Charlotte and their partnership in ministry with us at Rock Lake. It's in your name we pray these things. Amen.